My name is Killian. I'll be looking after you today. Are we all happy?
Yeah!
You're gonna be even happier once I get some more whiskey into you, huh? Now I know what you're thinking, and do not worry. In the very unlikely event of an alarm, stay calm and follow me. I promise we will be grabbing as many bottles as we can on our way out. So, believe it or not, absolutely everything you could ever want to know about Jameson whiskey, it's either in the bottle or it's on the label. Thank you very much. At the very top is the name. John Jameson was, of course, our family father. Right below that name, though, you have the Jameson family crest and motto, Sine Metu. Now, this is a Latin phrase, and it means without fear. And it was this phrase which defined John Jameson's life. And really, it's gone on to define our whiskey ever since. Now, there are many characters and stories in the Jameson history, but like I said, there is only one founding father. It all began in 1780, when the enterprising John set up shop right here in Smithfield. At the time, Dublin was in the midst of a boom, and the population was growing rapidly. In fact, we were the second largest city in Britain and Ireland, only behind London. And all across the city, there were hundreds of breweries and distilleries. In time, most of these faded. Few have guessed it, but Dublin had just gained an institution, one which has remained over 2 centuries later. Our distillery at Bow Street. And now here he is, John Jameson, and right beside him his wife Margaret. Together, they embraced the spirit of Sine Metu. And each other. With a little hard work and innovation, the distillery grew. And so did their family. Together, they had 16 children.
What?
I think we all know who the real hero here was. The time came when John II took the reins of the family business. And building upon the legacy entrusted to him by his father, he'd continue it on with his own hard work, constant innovation, and unmatched quality. By the 1820s, our distillery had grown to look like this. And between 1880 and 1905, the golden age of Irish whiskey, we were running on all cylinders here. Now, while the Jameson name is on the label, the ownership of our whiskey's legacy is actually shared. Next time you see a bottle of Jenny, I want you to do something for me. Try and find the barrel name hidden on the bottle. These figures, carrying the barrels on their backs, they represent the hard workers who built our whiskey from the ground up. Really, our story is told by our barrel men. By the 1880s, Bow Street was described as a city within the city of Dublin, and it was filled full of highly trained craftspeople. At this stage, we employed carpenters, coopers, painters, millers, ostlers, and they all took fantastic pride in their work. And Jameson was known to be a fantastic employer. If you had a job here, you generally had a job for life. At the distillery's peak, we employed over 300 people, through them supporting hundreds of families all across the city. By this time, this distillery was producing over 1 million gallons of whiskey a year. That equates roughly to about 6.5 million bottles, or the amount of whiskey I've drank since the start of the pandemic. So, by the turn of the 20th century, we were exporting our whiskey right across the world. And more people were enjoying Jameson's triple distilled smoothness and incomparable flavor. Sadly, however, time and history, in the shape of military and political turmoil, would intervene. War broke out across the world not once but twice. And back home we had our own conflict. Because of this building's location, it was used as a fortress during the 1916 Rising. When violence erupted across the city, martial law was declared, and no worker could gain entry to this building for 2 whole weeks. But Jameson loyalty prevailed, and our wage books tell us that every single employee was paid in full for those 2 weeks they missed. And just when things began to pick up, we entered into a trade war with Britain. And prohibition took effect in the United States. In fact, American bootleggers would label their moonshine Irish whiskey just to charge a little bit extra for it. This damage to our good name and loss of momentum, it seemed irreversible. And by the 1960s, the Irish whiskey trade had hit rock bottom. But the Jameson family motto, Sine Metu, without fear, held the key to surviving and to ultimately triumphing. The guardians of the whiskey bearing his name drew upon the spirit of John Jameson. They decided it was time to sink or swim. Other distillers had the same idea. And in 1966, after generations of rivalry, we joined forces with Powers and the Cork Distillery Company to form the Irish Distillers Group. Now today, while the soul of Jameson is still very much alive in this building, our heart lies in Middleton, County Cork, where we continue to distill and mature our whiskey for an ever-growing global demand. And Middleton really is the perfect place to produce the highest quality whiskey and allow us to experiment and innovate in the spirit of Sine Metu. Our whiskey is steeped in tradition and craft, but even right now, our distillers are exploring new ingredients and new techniques to build upon the ever-expanding tastes of today's whiskey drinkers. Remember what I said? Our story is told by our barrelmen, and Jameson has always been a people's story. It's about our makers, our masters, the tasters and crafters, everyone dedicated to living up to 242 years of history. And it's about everyone worldwide who enjoys Jameson. You may not realize it, but you're all barrelmen too. Our story began here in Bow Street, and now we continue it all across the world. And no matter where you are, it always comes right back to that bottle, to the name and the motto. Sine Metu, without fear. And that, folks, is the end of your history lesson.
Bravo.
Now, I know it sounds pretentious to say, but whiskey making, it's actually a combination of art and science. And our distillers down in Middleton, they oversee several processes in the creation of every bottle of Jameson. Today, we're going to break that process down into 3 key steps. The very first is sourcing quality ingredients. The fantastic thing about Ireland, and Cork in particular, is that we have easy access to the first 2 ingredients we need. Our very first ingredient, pure, clean water. The word whiskey comes from the Irish Ishtabach, which means the water of life. And the Dungourney River, which flows through the Middleton Distillery, is the life source of our entire operation. Our second key ingredient is barley. We source it grown within 100 miles of Middleton. We also import non-GMO corn or maize from France. What sets Jameson apart worldwide is that it's one of the few whiskeys made using 2 kinds of barley. The very first kind, unmalted. This comes directly from the fields into our process. We don't do anything to it. It still has its husk, so it's very tough. But it's only because of this our whiskey has a creamy texture and subtle hint of spice. Our second kind of barley then is malted. Again, this comes in from the fields. This time though, we store it in water and in a warm, humid room. What we're doing is tricking the barley into thinking it's springtime, so it germinates and releases the sugars and enzymes we need for the fermentation process in a little while. Once we have these, we can apply heat, drying the barley and stopping germination. So, that's all malt is. It's dried, germinated barley. Back when Bow Street was a functioning distillery, we used a traditional malting house to dry our barley. with ceramic malting tiles, just like those square fellas on the very tops of your tables. So, give them a touch. You can feel the heat off them. Here at Jameson, we like to maintain the clean character of our barley, so we only dry using clean, hot air. Some of our friends over in Scotland, though, they prefer to use peat or turf in their malting process. And this is what gives their whiskey its smokier characteristics. For us, though, now we have our grain, it's time to mill it up into a kind of coarse flour called grist. And to this, we add water and heat it to give us mash. What we're doing here is extracting and absorbing as much sugar and flavor as possible. We then filter this down into a liquid called wort. And to this, we add yeast. This is the fermentation process. It produces two things. Number one, carbon dioxide. Number two, though, and more importantly, alcohol. Now, if you've ever been to a brewery before, you'll notice what we've done up until this point is an incredibly similar process. And basically, what we have now is a kind of beer called wash. This wash, it's at about 10% alcohol by volume, roughly 20 proof. And if we're in the beer business, this would, more or less, be the end of the line for us. But here, we're not in the beer business. We're in the whiskey. I'm glad at least the front row here have done their homework. The back row, you're letting the side down. We are in the whiskey business. And now we're ready to move on to the second step in our process, distillation. You can see up behind me here 3 copper pot stills. And it was through repeated trials and tastings that John developed our signature triple distillation technique. Here's a quick rundown of how it works. Our first step is the wash still. Here we place our wash inside, and over a number of hours, we heat it. Now, because this wash contains both alcohol and water, the alcohol begins to boil first, meaning its vapors rise up and escape. Their freedom is short-lived, though. We then pass them through a condenser and return them as a highly alcoholic liquid called distillate. Once we've collected enough of this, we can stop heating, and all we leave behind is a little water in the still. We take our distillate and move it on to the second stop, the faint still. And we then repeat what we've just done before. And after this, our whiskey's getting smoother, but it's still not as smooth as we want. So we move it on to the third and final stop, the spirit still. And we distill one last time. John discovered that if you distilled your whiskey 3 times, you made it twice as smooth. And what we've done here, using malted and unmalted barley and these copper pots, is create pot still whiskey, the traditional Irish kind. Down in Middleton, though, we do make a second kind, called grey whiskey. Now, this one is made with our maize of barley, and distilled to a much more modern technique called column still distillation. Are we smelling the difference? Yeah? The column still whiskey is light. It's floral. It smells closer to a pure alcohol distillate. You're not getting the same sense of the grain in this one. So hopefully now you're getting a better understanding of the different characteristics that come from our 2 methods of distillation. And we want both sets of characteristics in our finished product, which is why we blend these 2 together at the end. We're going to move on to the third step in our process, maturation. Now here at Jameson, we mainly import 2 kinds of barrels, coming from the US and from Spain. These barrels, they've already been used before. The ones from the US had bourbon or American whiskey inside. The ones from Spain had Oloroso sherry inside. We only use pre-seasoned casks because they have a wonderful personality. We can then impart onto our whiskey. 2 pots will light a lamp for you, labeled bourbon and sherry. I want you to open up the bourbon bottle on the and from that you'll smell toasted oak, vanilla, caramel.
Lovely.
When you're ready, open up the sherry pot beside it. Nose in, good sniff. And again, that's our whiskey. We've matured in an excellent sherry cask. And from that you'll smell figs, nuts, dried fruits. It almost smells like a Christmas cake in there. So, now we have our great spirit and our casks. It's time to empty our distillate into the barrels where it'll mature. We oversee every single step in the production process. But at this point, we like to leave the spirit and the wood to their own devices. And there's gonna be a lot of give and take between the two. 4 flasks have been put down on the tables. You'll see the whiskey darkens as it matures because it takes on the characteristics of the wood. You'll also notice there's a little bit less each year. This is lost to evaporation. Here we call this evaporation the angel's share. And it amounts to about 2% of our whiskey each year. To put that into context, that's over 30,000 bottles of whiskey a day. One bottle every 3 seconds. And then after maturation, our whiskey is blended and it's bottled. And finally, I am very happy to say our whiskey's ready for tasting. Oh. You're gonna follow me. And everybody should now have 3 glasses of whiskey in front of them. In the middle is a glass of Jameson Original. To the left of the original is a glass of Crested. And then to the right of the original is a glass of Black Barrel. Now, and then I want to start with our glass of original in the middle. So you'll notice a lot of complex aromas and flavors. I think the best way to break it down is to mention the 4 key components we've just talked about in that last room. So just know what I'm about to say for the original here is true for the next 2 whiskeys we'll be trying and the Jameson range as a whole. The Jameson family is like any other family in the world. It's the same DNA, it's all just remixed in slightly different ways. So, in every bottle of Jameson, you will have pot still and column still whiskey. You'll then have the influence of the ex-bourbon barrels and the ex-sherry casks. All 4 of those are bringing their own characteristics to the finished product. So, from the top, that pot still whiskey. And in there, we have our 2 kinds of barley, malted and unmalted. Now that malted barley, what it gives us is a biscuity kind of sweetness. It's the unmalted barley though, where things get interesting. Because from that, you're gonna get spice. I tend to get black pepper on the back of my tongue. And that unmalted barley also gives us that creamy texture. It coats your mouth, sticks around even after you've swallowed it. Remember, when you smelled that pot still whiskey in the last room, it's quite heavy, it's robust, and it's very easy for that to overwhelm your palate. But it doesn't, because then we have our column still whiskey coming through. Again, remember what you smelled. It's lighter, it's floral, it cuts through the oiliness and brings some crisp, fresh notes. Those ex-bourbon barrels, they're made out of American oak, which is a naturally very sweet wood. And from that oak itself, we're gonna get vanilla, caramel, honey. What they also do before they pour any whiskey into them, they toast the inside. This just opens up the pores of the wood, allows the wood and the whiskey to interact a little bit more, but it also gives us those toasted oak notes. And then finally, the ex-sherry casks. Now with these guys, I want you to think Christmas cake. Because from them, we get those wonderful dried fruits, like raisins, figs, dates. We get nuttiness and those Christmas kind of spices. Cinnamon, nutmeg, a little bit of clove maybe. Now, I do realize it's all very well and good for me standing here preaching from my pulpit. I think sometimes the best way to learn is through practical experience. Whiskey is a very subjective topic, and there are no right or wrong answers to what you pick up on here. Everybody has their own preferences, everybody has their own palate. I'm not expecting you to pick up on everything that I've just mentioned there. All I'm really hoping to do is point you in the direction of picking up on something you might have missed the last time. And if you're picking up on something I haven't mentioned, that is also fine. I am by no means an authority figure on whiskey. I'm just a guy in an apron. Folks, next I want you to grab your glass of Crested from the left-hand side. So, on Jemmy Original, you're looking at approximately 70% column still whiskey to about 30% pot still. Crested, though, inverts that. It is predominantly pot still. And because of that, you have more unmalted barley in there, more oiliness, more creaminess. For me personally, I think Crested, it's a lot more mellow on the nose. And I think it feels an awful lot smoother too on the palate. Now that said, with more unmalted barley, you do also get a little bit more of that peppery spice, which may be contributing to that feeling of it being a little bit stronger. There is also a preference given to ex-sherry cask whiskey. Now it still has those same four components as the original, they're just blended together in different ratios. But because of that sherry influence, you may get a little bit more of that dried fruit sweetness, those raisins, those dates. And the bourbon barrels are still in there. You will also get the vanilla, the caramel. And then grab a glass of Black Barrel from the right-hand side. Now, the name Black Barrel comes from an old coopering tradition. Basically, when our barrels weren't in use, they'd be left outside of the yard. And the exposure to the elements would, for want of a better term, dull the wood, meaning it wouldn't give as much character to the whiskey as was maturing. Therefore, when it came time to reuse the barrels, the coopers would bring them inside and they'd toast them. Like I said, this just opens up the pores, rejuvenates the barrel. For a certain number of those ex-bourbon barrels, they double toast or char the inside. Literally, black them, hence the name. And because you're doing that, this whiskey, it's gonna be a lot smokier than the last one you tried here. Kind of dry campfire charcoal smokiness. But by double toasting the American oak barrels, you're also ramping their influence all the way up to 11. So with this one, you'll get a lot more bourbon sweetness too. That vanilla, that caramel, that honey. Again, you're looking at a slightly higher amount of pot still whiskey, not as much as in Crested, but you will still have that mellowness, that oiliness coming through from the pot still. I do kind of think though, that pot still spice combined with that smokiness gives this whiskey a little extra bite on the tongue. The other two don't necessarily have. Now, all three of these whiskeys are the same alcohol. They're all at 40%, 80%. But hopefully now you can really see the different effect those four components in different ratios have on the finished product. With your favorite whiskey, I'd like to raise a toast. Welcome you all to Family Month. We're going to toast the family month, Sine Amet, which means without fear. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Sine Amet.